Grade school? My guys, my ladies, my people, my color lunatics, my color ninjas. What the heck is going on this morning? How are you guys? I gotta tell you, I've missed you guys like crazy. That was a weird Friday not doing grade school with y'all. I'm really glad to be back with you. If you're tuning in now or tuning in later, you might have caught me at the very beginning of the stream, stepping into frame after trying and failing to top off my coffee. I've already had my allotted 2 pots of half-calf French press this morning, so I guess I'm going to have to make do. I'm going to have to live on that ration. So my prop cup, it's going away. I hope you guys are doing awesome. I was really excited to talk about the topic that we had on deck last week, so I've had another week to ruminate and think about it. We've got a lot to chop up. We're talking about qualifiers, right? That was what we discussed in my pre-recorded video last week and what we were slotted to discuss last week. Sorry we had to miss grade school. I was as bummed as you were, maybe more bummed. It's one of my favorite parts of the week. Glad to be back with you guys today to talk about qualifiers and how we can use them in a better way. Because as I mentioned in that video, I've talked a lot of smack about qualifiers over the years, and I don't mean to. I use them all the time. I just think that they shouldn't be, you don't want to pour them on your breakfast cereal. You want to use them judiciously and you want to use them well. And that's what we're here to talk about today. I'm here with my buddy Rafa. What's going on, Rafa?
It's been a great week. I'm back to the gym. So
Oh, you're back
everything's
you're back in the gym? Are you moving weight?
yeah. No. I'm going back to the gym.
Yeah. I love it. I love it, man.
Just to stay healthy.
You got to take care of the bod. You got to take care of the bod. That actually reminds me of something that I thought I would share with you guys, a little off book from qualifiers, but maybe you'll take something out of this. As we all do, I'm going through a very busy season right now in my professional life, busier than I want to be. I'm in a phase of my life where I don't care to glorify working long hours and saying, oh, but it's, it's my thing. And that's where my value is in my ability to just grind for like 12 or 16 hours. I can do that. And I've done that for many years. But I think it's a really toxic aspect, not just of our culture as colorists and post professionals and as filmmakers, but it's sort of a broader, more toxic idea that really permeates a lot of different cultures, that like we derive value, or our value is derived from putting in long hours at what we do. Long hours are fine, but that is not what makes me valuable anyway. And I think it's a really tragic thing if any of us so tightly tether our value to how many hours we put in on an ongoing basis. But I'm in a season right now, the last couple of weeks, I'm just having to put in long hours. It's just where things are at. And I'm always faced with like this fork in the road when those seasons come up, because they do come up sometimes. I'm like, okay, on one hand, do I be like, this is awesome, this is like how I prove my worth, this is great? Or on the other hand, do I do like, this sucks, I shouldn't be doing this, I should be doing my 4-hour work week? I've shared with some of you guys before, I'm really trying to, or not a 4-hour work week, I wish I had a 4-hour work week, my 4-hour work day. I've really been trying to stick to that this year with mixed results. But that's the other side of the coin the attitude that I can adopt when things get busy is like, oh, this sucks. I'm really like doing something suboptimal and something I shouldn't have to do, and it's not right. But I thought I'd share with you guys a sort of third conclusion, an alternative to that really struck me as I've been going through this busy season the last couple of weeks. There's a third option where we can say, hey, you know what? I'm busy right now. This is not sustainable. This is not optimal. This is not where my value is derived, and yet it's where I am and it's where I need to be. And what I've derived from this latest season is looking at, well, what lessons can I learn? And in my case, part of those lessons is figuring out how to, or part of that lesson, I should say, is figuring out how to build up systems and support around me so that my company does not stop and start with my workday. Because right now that's still, it's less tethered than it has been in the past, but there's still a lot of operations within my company that simply cease to function when I'm not at my desk. So I take the lesson from that, and in the meanwhile, I say, hey, you know what? That was a great way to learn that lesson. I'm glad I didn't have to learn it in a more expensive way. I'm good for the interim to pull some long hours, lose some sleep, whatever it takes, as long as I recognize this is not sustainable, it's not ideal, I'm going to get through it. And I got to tell you guys, I'm going to have a different week next week and in the weeks to come, but I'm coming off the end of a very hectic work week this week. And I feel great. I'm looking forward to catching up on some sleep, but I feel great because I adopted that third attitude as opposed to like, this is awesome, this is how it's always going to be, I should strive for this, or going like, oh my God, this is terrible. That third alternative I've found to be better. You guys are all in your own, like professional adventures, and you're going to have your own challenges and struggles, but we all get busy. And I thought you might take something out of that lesson that I learned this week, that there is a third alternative going, okay, what can I learn from this? And how can I be my best while I need to be at my best to get this done, and then move into the next season when it comes about. So I hope you guys get something out of that. Enough about that. Let's talk about color grading. Now, before we dive into talking about qualifiers, I've got something pretty exciting to share with you guys. We are about to announce the second round of my Colorist Career Accelerator course. Was anybody in the summer session of the Colorist Career Accelerator course who's here today? Sound it out in the chat. Let me know. Was it cool? Was it terrible? Was it a waste of time? Was it boring? Was it fun? Rafa, you were there. What was it like?
I mean, it was amazing on my end, at least.
I mean, Rafa was manning the switchboard, as it were, and really helping me make sure everybody got their questions answered. And I was taking advantage of the fact that at this point, Rafa and Gadali understand my workflow sometimes better than I do. So I'm glad you were there to help get everybody's questions answered, Rafa. But long story short, I hope everyone who was in the course, who's here today, is going to back me up in saying it was an amazing 4 days. It was a really great time. And for those of you who weren't there and don't know what the heck I'm talking about, let me give you a brief synopsis of what the Colorist Career Accelerator is all about. It's a 4-day live workshop that's going to take you through every part of growing, building, developing a professional practice as a colorist. So this is not a course for hobbyists. This is not a course for dabbling in color grading. That's what YouTube is for. If you want to learn more about color grading and that's kind of your vantage, I've got a ton of great content here on YouTube to take you there. This course is about whether you are a professional today or whether it is your goal to be a full-time working professional colorist. How do you get there? How do you move further down that path? That was something that I've struggled with for my entire career. Nobody gave me a playbook, and the little bit of guidance that I got, I was so grateful for because it was so hard to come by. So that's what this course is explicitly aimed at. And there's kind of a couple of profiles that made themselves clear to us, especially after this last round, and I got to know all of you guys who joined for the last one. You know, if you're a colorist who is more on the hobbyist or the amateur side and you want to take things pro and make money crafting beautiful image, the course is for you. If you are looking to improve your grading skills and put out higher quality work for yourself, but also so that you can attract bigger clients, this course is for you. If you are in the film industry or in the entertainment industry and you want to transition out of some other role, maybe you're an editor, maybe you're working on set, and like me, you don't like being out of the house that much and you want to move into color grading and you find it really inspiring, this course is for you. And the last thing, or the last sort of category that really became evident is if you are a working colorist and you feel like you've hit a plateau or a wall, you feel stuck, you don't know which way is forward, you don't know how to take your practice, take your business to the next level, this course is for you. I've been in that spot many times in my career and I've had to navigate it, and I've come up with some pretty good strategies along the way. So those are just a couple of sort of examples of types of individuals who this course is going to be a really good fit for. So if you fit within that category, or if you're anyone else who's really serious about building a professional color grading practice, I'm going to be dead honest with you. I try to give you guys as much value as I possibly can here on YouTube. I love doing it. I love interacting with you. And I love sharing knowledge that was sort of, like opaque or hidden to me when I was trying to develop my craft. But YouTube is only going to take you so far. You're not going to learn your craft. You're not going to develop a world-class professional practice in 15-minute increments on YouTube. You need to sit down. You need to focus. You need to get with like-minded people. You need to get with in a sort of extended mentorship relationship like I try to cultivate with everybody who participates in the course, and really focus in for longer chunks of time and in a more structured format. So if that's you, I really hope you'll consider joining us. Just a bit about the way that the course works. We have a cap on registration. We had a cap this summer. We're going to have a cap again this fall because it's important to me. If you sign up for this, if you pay for this, if you're showing up and you're giving me your time, I want to give you an excellent experience. And we were just talking about Raf and Gadali manning the chat and making sure everybody got their questions answered. And of course, I'll be there to answer your questions as well. I want to make sure that you get maximum value out of the course. So for that reason, we don't have open registration. We don't allow as many people who want to join because I can't handle 1,000 people as well as I can a smaller number. We are trying to scale that right now. So over the summer, we did 100. In the fall, we're going to do 200. It's going to fill up fast, guys. Just a little bit of info on that. We sold out in 17 hours once we opened registration for the summer course. 91% of those registrations went to people who were on the wait list for that course. The wait list is opening up today. There's a link in the description that you can check out. Definitely encourage you to go get on that wait list. It's almost the only way to stay up to date quickly enough with the opening of the registration to have a good chance at getting a seat. So go sign up for that wait list. Even if you're not sure yet, you don't have to commit to anything today. But if you're not on the wait list, you have a 9 in 100 chance of grabbing a slot when we do open registration. So check out that link. Go get on the wait list if you're curious and you're interested, and you're going to learn more in the coming weeks by doing that. So definitely encourage you guys to do that. Let me see if I wanted to share anything else about the Colorist Career Accelerator course. So, just to sort of explicitly tell you a few more details, October 13th through 16th is the date for that. So that is a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We've timed it that way so that those of us who are working other jobs or, juggling other obligations, we've got a bit of a better chance of being able to be there for all 4 days. And it's 4 hours a day. So it's a big, long chunk. It's, the equivalent of, like 4 back-to-back days of, like a college, course session plus an extra hour. So it's intense for sure, but it is a digestible amount of information on each day. And it's going to be really fun. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is, as I said a moment ago, this is a live thing. It's kind of like grade school here. So we've had questions in the past about like, oh, can I just purchase the recordings from the session in the summer? No, you can't. I intentionally have decided against that because I don't want to take your money for you joining, for you not being there in person. I want you to be there. I want to interact with you. I want to hear your questions. I want to answer your questions. I want you to get plugged into the community of like-minded professionals and aspiring professionals that you are going to get plugged into by being there. So October 13th through 16th, after you sign up for the wait list, you're going to confirm your spot. You'll get a confirmation email that confirms your spot in that wait list, and you're going to hear more details about the bonuses that we offer. There's so much cool stuff that comes along with this course. We have a bunch of practice footage from a really beautifully shot film shot on an Alexa that you can use for your reel. We got an exclusive LUT pack, templates for your business, all kinds of fun stuff. So really long way of saying, go check out that wait list. Go get signed up if you're interested. Now then, let's talk about some qualifiers. I'm curious. I may not have given anyone a chance to pop any questions into the chat yet, but I'm also wondering if there are a backlog of questions from the video and then our week down from grade school last week. Any questions populated in there so far, Rafa?
We have a question here from Rami IQ. Hello, Cullen. In the qualifier tab, there is HSL, Luma, and RGB. My question is, what is the RGB used for and when?
Oh, this is a really good question. So, as identified here in the qualifier tab, let me turn on my Resolve here. All right, so here in the qualifier tab, let's get some of this junk out of our way. As we've observed, we have an HSL, we have a Luma, and we have an RGB. Just before we get on to RGB, HSL, that's self-explanatory. That's what I was demonstrating in last week's pre-recorded video. The Luma option for that, you guys can see how often I use qualifiers. Okay, here they are. They've moved a little bit since the last time I tried to go to something other than the HSL. So we're going to talk about this RGB in a moment. And then this Luma, you can even see this visually, but I just want to point out, I don't even know why this is delineated as a separate thing. Like, Luma is the same exact thing as pulling a qualifier only on the Luminance channel down here. No difference whatsoever. I don't even think of that as a category of qualifier. It's just a smart way to use an HSL qualifier if you can get away with it. I talked about that in last week's video where I said, hey, if you can do one channel, do one channel. And if you can do it with if all things being equal, you can get it done with one channel, pick the Luminance channel because it's going to pull the cleanest key, right? But back to the question about the RGB keyer. So in the case of the HSL, as well as the RGB keyer, we essentially have up to 3 criteria that we can use for making our selection, right? And we looked at some examples of that in the pre-recorded video, but before we look at the RGB, if we look at the HSL, something that I did in more than one of the examples that I made in the pre-recorded video is to sweep my luminance here. And let me turn my highlight mode on so we can see, as I sweep my low value for my luminance to the right, my threshold for how bright something must be in order to be included in my key gets higher and higher and higher, so that by the time I've got my low threshold up here, turns out in this image, there are no pixels that are brighter than 73 on this 0 to 100 scale, okay? So that's the idea there, is we're just sweeping up and down the image. Same thing with our saturation, and same thing with our hue, except our hue happens to move in a circle, right? So we're defining a center point and then a width around that. At a width of 100, that's the width of the full color wheel. So that's red, green, blue, cyan, magenta, yellow, all the way around the wheel, right? So we can narrow that down as well. All a long fancy way of saying these are our 3 criteria when we're in an HSL qualifier. I find these criteria to be fairly intuitive, right? If I say I want to focus in on my red hues, I can narrow my width, I can move my center point, and I can look at both the image as well as the sort of color spectrum in my hue wheel and recognize that I am now beginning to focus pretty exclusively on my reds, right? Fairly intuitive. And if I then want to combine that, it gets to be a bit of a thought exercise, but it's not that crazy for me to say, well, now in addition to that, in addition to saying you must be red to be admitted into my qualifier party, you also must meet a certain minimum luminance threshold to be admitted into my qualifier party. And you have to meet both of those criteria. It's not enough to meet just one, right? So now I'm sweeping that luminance like I showed a moment ago. Whole reason I'm demonstrating this before I talk about the RGB here is I find this to be quite intuitive, right? These 3 criteria, hue, saturation, luminance. In the RGB keyer, the premise is exactly the same as everything that I just talked about. We have 3 parameters that we can tune and articulate to say, my pixels must fall within the defined ranges of each of these 3 parameters, whichever ones I choose to constrain. The challenge is, really what we are doing with an RGB qualifier is defining a hue, right? We're just defining some combination of red and green and blue, which we are selecting for, if that makes sense. Now, you guys may have heard me talk about this before. I talk about this in my courses a lot. One of the things that sort of bugs me on the image science side of things, if you want to think about it that way, I do not like to think about hue in the context of red, green, and blue. Like, yes, I recognize if I, in a pure colorimetric workflow like we use when we're color grading, if I take red and green, that's yellow. I recognize that I can define hue by mixing my primaries, red, green, and blue. I do not find that to be intuitive, especially if I'm looking at like, well, I want to select for kind of like, I don't know, like a yellowy or like a greeny yellow, I could say. How do I do that with red, green, and blue? It's definitely possible. I can definitely do it. It's just not intuitive to me that like, oh, well, what I need to do is select for this portion of my red and this portion of my green. It's just not as intuitive to me. So that would be kind of like a very long way of saying, I find the RGB qualifier to be not necessarily less useful. You can still pull good keys with it, but you generally have to pull them by sampling as opposed to by qualifying in here. At least that's how I have to do it, because I don't find these parameters to be nearly as intuitive as the parameters of hue, saturation, and luminance. So effectively, no real difference between these two, and you can get a good result, maybe sometimes even a better result than you would with the HSL keyer, but that may come at the expense of some kind of intuitive operation, at least if you're a bonehead like me. Hope that helps.
Okay, a question from Kaur. What would you like to be improved / changed in the Resolve Qualifier?
Oh, I feel like that's a dangerous question to answer for Carr. He's got some. He might turn around and go do it, won't you, buddy? It's a good question though. What would you like to see improved in the qualifier? I'll give you guys sort of a funny beef. I don't actually think the qualifier is that bad. I think the UI for the qualifier is sort of problematic. And not even in the sense that I can't get the results that I want using it, but sometimes I don't think it's as clear when I pull, like, let's turn on our highlight mode and just do a simple bad key, okay? Like, this is a bad key. Can you guys see my lower left-hand side? It's probably tough over YouTube, but look at my parameters there. And just before I go on, I want you to think to yourself and answer my question. Why is this a bad key? What's so bad about this key? Why is Colin dogging on this key? Think about that for just a moment before I tell you why this is a bad key. This is a bad key because it has no softness to it. It has a hard edge. You can see it visually here. You can see that my low soft value is zeroed out. So it's a totally hard edge. And the moment I go to make an adjustment to this image, like let's say I want to do some offset, you can see why this is a bad key, right? I'm just completely breaking apart the image. Now, this is an extreme case where I can probably on any image I apply this qualifier, and probably with any adjustment I apply within that qualifier, I will visually see a problem, right? The issue is the moment it's any less egregious than that, like this is still a bad key. It's really just not soft enough and it's biting into the image in a problematic way. However, I'm not getting a great sense of that from the UI, from the interface here. So we've already kind of started touching on a theme, I guess, today about like how you find things to be meaningful and intuitive. One of the ways that I find things to be intuitive is I can look at a curve and I can go, oh, that's a very gentle curve with a nice shape to it. Or that's a very hard-edged curve that doesn't have that great of a shape to it. I can kind of like, if I pivot and look over and look at my custom curves for a minute and look at like, don't even pay attention to the image, which looks beautiful. Just look at this curve. Like this would be a pretty good example of like, well, that is not the prettiest curve I've ever seen. It's kind of harsh. It's kind of aggressive, right? Versus like, if I do something big and gentle and broad like that, that's a curve that I like more. So very long way of answering. What I would like to see the HSL qualifier sort of operate as is as three curves where I can just define like, hey, what region of the image is in, what region is out, and how strongly in or out are those images, if that makes sense. And I actually like most of the tools that I build, that's how they function because I just find it to be intuitive. So that would be kind of my main beef. And to really just put a point on it, my issue is that when you pull a key with the qualifier, you have to wait for that bad qualifier to manifest as a problem in a particular image before it's super easy to recognize that that's a bad qualifier. It's something that I struggled with a lot when I was a colorist early in my career. Is I'd pull a qualifier, it would look okay on the image. I'd grade 10 images. I'd be copying and pasting that qualifier maybe for a scene or for a, like an entire like look for a film. And then I'd land on the right image and it would break and it would look weird. And I go, well, damn, what happened there? What's going on? Well, what happened is it's been a dirty key all the time. It's been a bad qualifier all along. It's just that there was nothing in the particular images I was seeing, nor, more importantly, was there anything in the actual UI telling me that is sooner or later going to bite you in the butt. Whereas when you have a curve, to me anyway, I can look at a curve and immediately go, oh, sooner or later, that's going to be a problem for sure. Or I can look at it and go, nope, that will travel on 5 shots. That will travel on 5,000 shots because it's just too gentle to ever break. So long answer there, but hopefully not only helpful for Car's question, but for all of us to understand kind of like we really are touching on my fundamental beef with qualifiers, which is that they're sharp without necessarily letting us know how sharp they really are.
All right, let's jump to another kind of qualifiers from Christopher. Do you have any real-world use cases of using the 3D keyer?
Oh, the 3D keyer is a great thing to talk about. And this came up in the comments for this video a little bit as well. I'll be honest with you, I do not. Sort of for the same reason as with the RGB keyer here. Like, I have seen people get good results and even get results that you might not be able to get with an HSL qualifier, but it comes at a cost. I feel maybe I'm in like Colorist career accelerator mode. I want to be like interacting with all you guys, but I want to put the question to the room. Everyone think about this for a minute. What compromise am I talking about? What cost am I talking about? Of like, well, if I can pull a key that's as good or maybe better, maybe something I couldn't do with an HSL qualifier, why is it that Cullen can't think of a single example where he's done that? Why is it that Cullen basically would never use a 3D keyer? Just think about that for a moment. What cost might I be referring to? What I'm talking about is the fact that I'm once again left with the only way that I can make a qualification of my image is by sampling the image. And that means that everything I'm doing is tethered to whatever image I'm on. So, like we already kind of like in last week's video and in my earlier demonstration, we talked about how I actually like to pull keys. I don't like to sample within the image unless I'm just looking to get a general sense for where a pixel resides in one of these parameters. I like to do things parameter by parameter and manually to make sure that I'm staying as broad and soft as I possibly can. Because the sampler doesn't know how to draw a beautiful key, it just knows how to select for what I say. So like, okay, great, like I've qualified for my skin tones, and maybe if I do something like, I used to do this a lot when I was first starting as a colorist, I was just kind of like tap around until I was getting the best result I could just by eyedroppering. But that's really not the best way to get a good clean key. The best way to do it is to do it by hand, as broadly, gently, softly, and with as few parameters as you possibly can. You can't do that with a 3D keyer. With a 3D keyer, all you have the opportunity to do is sample something and say, oh, let's also add this stuff over here, or let's keep that but lose that. It's kind of the same thing as the beef that I was just talking about with the qualifier itself. The net result may look okay on one image or may look okay on 5 images, but it would be quite difficult for me to know how clean, how soft, how broad versus how dirty, how sharp, how harsh is the effective matte that I have created with the 3D keyer. It's actually kind of hard to assess because we are not looking at parameters. We're just looking at this, sort of magical net result, if that makes sense. So I don't want to discourage you from using it if you feel like you can get good results, but this is also where, like, to me, we're talking about an important but a very small portion of my grading practice, right? My work is going to come from the pipeline, from the look. My work is going to come from my primaries, my exposure, my ratio, my balance, my power windows controlling the frame, and my broader secondaries like, hue versus hue curves, things like that. Very, very, very little of my work is going to come from the qualifier. That doesn't mean I don't use it or that I wouldn't want to have it available to me. I do use it and it's important to me, but there's also a point where I'm like, well, I don't want to, you have to consider sort of a cost benefit thing. Like, this is going to be far lower benefit than really nailing my primaries. And if it also carries a cost, like my threshold for how much time a qualifier will take or how many problems it will cause, I'm very demanding about those things because the qualifier at the end of the day isn't doing the bulk of my grade for me. It's just sweetening it, if that makes sense. So my thoughts on the 3D keyer. But I'm encouraged I would encourage you guys rather to play around with it and let me know your own thoughts. And that's one of my favorite parts about the channel here is when you guys say, hey, I actually love the large scale of temporal noise reduction or whatever it is. I find it really interesting to hear how you guys are working as well. So don't be shy.
Oh, here's a great question from Darius. What tools from Made Finesse for you are most practical and used, and which are bad and not used at all?
Yeah, that is a good question. I want to see, I don't think I have any motion material here. I think these are all still frames. The main thing to look at with your matte finesse, and I will, first of all, fully confess, I am not an expert on matte finesse. Generally, if I can't get, I'm trying to, there's sort of like a series of rounds of things that I'm going through and I'm grading. It's like, I'm trying to get 80% of the way there with my primaries and my, my first 3 nodes, right? The last 20%, I'm trying to get 80% of that with my power windows, with my curves, with my really soft stuff. The 20% of that 20%, that's the range where my qualifiers live, okay? Now, bear with me. I feel like I'm doing one of those like sort of Russian doll concentric stacking things. 20% of that is where I am going to be trying to get an acceptable result. Like 80% of the function of my qualifier that I pull should come from these, to put it more simply. The remaining 20% can come from matte finesse if it's necessary. And I keep it really simple. The three parameters that I will use here are clean black, clean white, and blur. And I'm just trying to think of a scenario, maybe the last scenario where I had to do that. You know, one that comes up a lot that is never an easy key to pull, but sometimes just has to happen. Like, look at my subject's lips here. They're not that darn different from her skin, are they? But let's just kind of try to quickly pull a key for her lips. So let's go over to, I'm going to start with hue here because that's, I just know from experience, I'm going to have to qualify for hue without a doubt, almost certainly anyway. So I'm just going to start with that, even though I might typically start with luminance. And I'm setting some width so that I have an in and an out, and then I'm qualifying for this. And this thing is actually making a liar out of me because it looks really, really good. I'm getting much more of a qualification of an isolation, I should say, than I thought I would, just by using my hue. And then maybe I can follow up with my luminance and try to sweep some of that dirt, like so. So look, I'm getting a little bit further out this is without that luminance, and this is with adding that in. I'm kind of going slow because it reacts quickly when you find the sweet spot. Again, making sure I'm going nice and soft on that. And this is definitely a scenario where I'm going to limit that with a power window and track it, just because like I don't want to have to tighten up the key any further in order to get rid of this stuff, because the key is going to be cleaner right now. And all I need to do is pair it with some spatial isolation with a power window, and lips are a very easy thing to track. So I'm just going to go same kind of thing, nice and soft, choke this in here like so, and make sure that her nose is fully out of there. And this kind of goes back to our conversation about power windows. Don't get too literal with like, I don't care if the inner circle of this power window touches on the surface feature a little bit. That's okay. That's not the end of the world. I care what the end result is, not what the shape of the window is and whether it perfectly contours or hugs the outline of what I'm trying to qualify for. I care what the net result is, which right now I'm really happy with. And this isn't even a moving frame. It's just a single still, but I could track that very easily. And if we go back to the question about matte finesse, I've just pulled a really clean, really simple key. I didn't even need to use my saturation. So I just pulled a key using my hue and my luminance. My softness is not as soft as I would like it to be on the luminance side, but it's kind of where it needs to be. This is, like I made that example earlier of like my softness was around that value when I said this is not a great key. So that's going to hold here, but this is a great example of where we would want to use the matte finesse, but in the simplest way possible, really just by adding some blur, like so. And now, again, this is something else that I wanted to touch on today that is an important aspect of using qualifiers. It's not just about how you pull the key. It's about your expectations and your actions once you have pulled that key. So let's say I wanted to turn her lips like goth purple. I can't. The key is just not that good. It's not going to hold up to that. You're going to see the edges. There's going to be problems. That's more of a visual effect. That's a compositing type of thing. And compositors have expertise and tools that would allow them to do something like that a lot more readily than I'm going to ever be able to in Resolve, even with all the time and skill in the world, which I have neither of when it comes to these things. So instead, the operation, what I can consider is like this is not necessarily the case here, but let's say we're like, oh, the shade of lipstick is a little too, like we'd like it to be even a little bit more natural and less distinct from the rest of her, like cheeks and forehead and thing like that. So probably within this, I could just do like a hue versus hue and reach for my reds and just rotate those left a little bit. So that's before and after. You see that? So that's actually a pretty good exploration all the way around of pulling a nice soft key, using just a little bit of matte finesse. I would not want to go without that matte finesse that I used here, but I just did my blur. I didn't even have to do anything else. And then I'm just within that doing a sensible operation that's not pushing the key too hard. You don't want to ride the key too hard, if that makes sense, because it's just a key that you pulled in a color corrector. It's not a key that, a roto artist has pulled or a compositor has pulled in a dedicated environment where they have more powerful tools for that. We're using it to the best of our ability, and that's a really nice, clean selection, and I'm really happy with the result. And this will travel, I can tell you, let's say that, like I've got a medium close, a close, a wide, and a 2-shot or whatever of her face within this scene, this qualifier will travel really, really nicely. Especially if I'm doing it at the head of my node graph, like so. So I'm kind of doing this backwards because I didn't do it correctly at the beginning. But if I'm doing this as a separate branch pulled right off from the initial state of the image, and I've got all my other primaries happening up here, that means this qualifier is going to be fed the same initial raw image state regardless of whatever I'm doing up here, and it's going to travel even more consistently from shot. Do that in a different way than, like in the way that I just did here. This is not a qualifier I really need to babysit very much. I'll spot check it here and there, but I feel it's just too darn soft to ever break or cause problems. The only way it could really go sideways is if I push the correction itself too far within that qualification. Long answer, hopefully some fun, interesting stuff in there.
Okay. Question from Round Productions. Even though saturation values sit between 0 and 1, is there any way that allows the key or X versus Y sat values be easier to manipulate? I'm always finding that only the lower 5% matters in separating saturation.
Yep, that would be what you just observed would be a close runner-up for my least favorite thing about the qualifier. So here's the reality, guys. When you are, like you've heard me talk plenty about, like, you got to be working color managed. You should check out DaVinci Wide Gamut and use my DaVinci Wide Gamut workflow. Here's all the benefits. Here's why it's awesome. Here's why you should never work display referred, where you're just looking at the image and twisting knobs until you get an acceptable result. One of the realities of working in that way is that when you are using a qualifier in a scene referred context, when you're operating on like a log or a camera negative or a scene state image as opposed to a display state image, which is what we are doing right now, my actual image state, even though I'm seeing this image, the image that this qualifier is operating on is this. Does that make sense? It's lower contrast, it's lower in color. So as a result, you get exactly what was just observed, that like the effective range of your saturation channel in a qualifier, you've got this range from 0 to 100. The actual range, the amplitude of this saturation channel, like the range that it exists within, there are going to be very, very few values that exist above 10. Like if we just, let's sweep the sat range real quick here. And this is just one image, but like, let's see, if I turn on my highlight mode, what's the highest value in this image before everything's gone? Yeah, look, 2. At 2, I've got barely anything left in this image. Now, there's not anything especially saturated here, but I can tell you from experience, if you find something that can hold up to a higher threshold than 10, you've got like traffic lights or something crazy. So the question is a good one. How do I pull a clean qualification on this channel when the effective range of it is such a teeny tiny portion of the overall range of the slider? The short answer is there's really no great way to do it. It's just one of the limitations of the qualifier, and it's a limitation of the fact that, or it's a result of the fact that the qualifier was really designed to work on display state images as opposed to the way we like to work, which is on camera negative or scene state images. However, this is something that I wanted to talk about anyway, so I'm really glad it came up. We can use a strategy that compositors use all the time. Okay, you guys have I've heard this question asked in different forms before in some of my courses, where someone will say, yeah, but my qualifier doesn't work in log, so I want to work in Rec 709. I'm trying to think of a great analogy for that, but that's a really, really problematic attitude. That's like saying, I can't even think of a great analogy at the moment, but you're wagging the dog, essentially. Like, you want what your image looks like to be, and the results that you're getting and the way that your process feels, that needs to govern your process, not how cleanly you can pull a key, right? Because the key that you're pulling, that image that you're saying is better for feeding the key, no one's ever even going to see that image. That's just what you feed into the keyer. So I'm just going to give you an example. This is something that compositors will do all the time. Compositors all the time will have to pull a tracking point for a moving shot or a feature moving within a shot or something where both is happening. Camera's moving, subject is moving. They have to pull a feature. Something that a compositor will do all the time is they need to pull a track. All they need is keyframes that accurately describe the motion of that feature over time. I'm going on a tangent here, but stick with me. This will be worth it. You follow what I'm saying? That's the compositor's task. Something that the compositor will do in order to make that easier, or something that compositors recognized makes it easier to pull that track, is to juice the contrast of the image. Like really, really crank it up so that you've got very little detail in between 0 and 1, but there's this high contrast that the tracking feature can see. So it's easier for it to watch features as they move over time because there's higher contrast, okay? Now, compositors understand that doesn't mean that they need to manipulate the image to look higher contrast. That means they need to feed a higher contrast stimulus into their tracking feature, okay? Let me show you what I'm talking about and how we can apply that idea here inside of Resolve. If your contention or your hypothesis is like, well, I want to get a healthier saturation channel, and saturation channel is going to be healthier in Rec 7 or 9, which it will be, by the way. If we go over to like post, if I look at like after my output transform over here on the right, let's sweep my saturation channel again. Now let's turn on our highlight mode. Oh, I'm in Loom mode somehow. I've got, well, to be honest with you, that's not even making that much of a difference, which is why I don't lead with this insight. But let's say for the sake of argument, you want to pull a key off of a Rec 7 or 9 image, but you don't want to work in Rec 7 or 9 when you're grading. That's very easy to do. All I'm going to do is create a layer mixer here within this branch. Let me prepend a node. And all we're going to do is feed, we're going to do a color space transform down here. This is not a color space transform that is meant for the end image to receive. This is a color space transform that is meant for the image which will feed into my keyer to receive. So I'm just doing my same standard Rec 7 or 9 to, I don't even need to worry about this stuff. I'm just going from my scene space to my display space, like so. I am then going to go in here and I'm going to pull my key, whatever that may be. Let's just turn this highlight mode back on. And let's say that's my key, okay? And now, all I'm gonna do is disconnect this. I actually didn't even need that layer mixer that I made a moment ago. All I'm gonna do is say, okay, I've pulled my key. Let's say I think this is a better key than I'm ever gonna be able to pull when the image is in a log state, okay? All I have to do is feed the output of this back up here. And now I've got that key pulled, but I'm still operating on the log image. That's a little slippery, but this session is recorded. Rewatch what I just talked about. See if you can make it click. It's actually a really powerful thing, at least to have available to you to be aware of. I did a job this week where I was really struggling to pull a key. I needed to pull the key. It was what the client wanted. And I was just struggling to get the key pulled. And I said, well, let's just kick the tires and see if I have any better luck by transforming the stimulus that I'm feeding into that key into Rec 7 or 9 before I pull the key itself. And in that case, it actually did help a little bit. It helped me to pull a slightly better key than I would have been able to otherwise. So this is a bit complex, especially like with the other confusing elements of this node graph. Let's just kind of simplify it. So this is the core idea. So we have our starting point image. We have our layer where we are going to want to, whatever, bump our skin tones, whatever operation we're trying to do. But instead of pulling the key right within node number 2, we do a separate branch where we are converting out to Rec 7 or 9. We are pulling a key off of that Rec 7 or 9 state image, and we are then feeding that key into the key input of the node where we are now going to manipulate our skin by, say, further saturating it or whatever I want to do. And this is easily the ugliest key I've pulled in some time, so don't judge my horrible manipulation, but you get the idea. If that doesn't click quite yet, that's okay. It's fairly complex. That's why it's not talked about more, but it is a very powerful thing to at least be aware of when you're like up against a wall and you're like, dude, I need every inch I can get to try to pull a decent key on what my client's asking me for. It's good to have this trick up your sleeve. I wouldn't start here, but sometimes it'll come in handy. Like I said, it came in handy for me this week. So that's my very long answer to what do we do with the impossibly low amplitude of the saturation channel when we're pulling keys in scene space. One option is to convert the input image for the qualifier into one which is going to give you a healthier saturation channel. Hope that helps.
Okay, I think this is the best question now. Not a specific question about qualifiers, but when making a selection and bringing the alpha from one node to another, sometimes it changes slightly. Why does that happen? And might that slight difference be a problem?
I've never witnessed that before. I feel like it travels, maybe I just haven't ever noticed, but it seems to me to travel quite one-to-one. If I do like a, like the example that we just had here, this key, the only thing that's worth noting is like right now when I'm in highlight mode, like this is actually a perfect example to answer that question. I am seeing it change, but the key is not changing. The image that is being revealed is changing. If I flip over to my black and white mode, the key is identical, right? So that may be a bug that I've never noticed or I'm not aware of, but it's not one that I've seen before. And it's possible that there's some confusion about what's the key versus what is the underlying image. Because if you grade the image or transform the image between, in this case, node 4 and 2, you will get an apparently different result in your highlight mode, even though the key has not moved 1 inch. So I hope that sort of helps. At least give that a try. See if that's your culprit.
Okay, a question from Uliana. What's the difference between selecting a color via hue versus and doing the same operation in the qualifier? Why is the first one better?
Yes.
And also, it is necessary to disable other channels when using only one, like disabling Hue and Sat when using only Luma?
Yes, several good questions there. So let's hit both of those. First of all, what is the difference between for example, hue versus hue operation here versus qualifying for a hue and spinning the hue knob? Everyone follow what I'm asking there? Does that make sense? In short, you could perform an identical operation with both tools. You could absolutely perform an identical operation with both tools. This kind of goes back to the beef that I was relating earlier, that you're just getting a different understanding of what you're doing and how sound and how gentle and how soft it is in one tool versus the other. So like I could do a really problematically sharp hue selection and rotation with my curves, and I could do a really beautiful, gentle selection and rotation with my qualifier, but the bias of the tools is going to be the opposite. The curves are generally going to bias me to do soft things, because if I don't do soft things, it's sort of visually evident. Like, don't even pay attention to the image right now. Just look at what I'm doing. Like, we can visually infer, like, okay, with goalposts this tight and a correction this extreme, we can infer before we even see the breakage in the image. We can just look at that curve and be like, that's a problem. At least like I think that's a good skill to cultivate, is like if you see a curve this aggressive, pretty good chance you're going to encounter problems sooner or later. You don't get that same feedback in the qualifier necessarily, at least not to the same extent. So while you could do the things that we do here are not things you can't do with the qualifier. They're things that I find to be easier to do well here. And also, here's the other thing that I'll point out to you guys. Like, I'll just give you an easy example. One of the most common things that I do when I'm grading, for whatever reason, is I'll look at my image, I'll look at the balance. We set the exposure, set the ratio, set the balance. That's all looking good. And I'll just look at the image and I'll go, you know what? The yellows are vectoring a little green for my taste. I'll go to my curves, I'll go to my hue versus hue, grab my yellow preset, and just rotate it up a little bit. And I'm done. That's really fast. And it's really gentle and it's really soft. It's as good a result as I will ever get with the qualifier. But if I were to do my level best trying to make that happen in the qualifier, I'd have to go over there, narrow my width, find my center, go into highlight mode, kind of sweep until I find my yellows, try to figure out how wide I want that to be, try to figure out how soft I want that to be. Probably need to flag off the low luminance values like so. And now I'm ready to start rotating hue. I can turn my highlight mode off and rotate that to the right like so. and I'm really not happy with what I'm seeing quite yet. So, you know, like, I'm actually wondering why I'm not seeing more of that adjustment. Let's sweep that down a little bit and turn that back off. Is my hue knob actually doing something? Oh no, I was hitting my Loom mix. That would be why. So there's me doing my level best to make this adjustment as quickly as I did with my curves. I didn't get anywhere near it. And also this is not as clean as what I was doing with the curves. So sort of a practical example of the points that I'm talking about there. I love the curves. All of the beefs that I have with the qualifier go away with the HSL curves. I love them. I use them all the time. Still do primaries first, but like the example that I just gave, I'm going to make some sort of targeted manipulation of my yellows in like any grade that I do at some point. I'm going to go, oh, those yellows are a little warm or they're a little green, and I'll rotate them accordingly. And I don't have to babysit. I don't have to do anything from there. I just know that's going to be a good adjustment as long as the visual looks good on my monitor.
Okay, a question from Vivo Alexis. When pulling a key for a skin tone separation, let's say teal and orange, do you grab the hair with the skin? And if not, where do you draw the line between hair and skin? And I want to add to that question. Since a lot of us have been trained to do it like that, what would be your approach to create super separated looks without using keys?
Oh yes, man. We're covering so much good ground today. I love this question. This is a great thing to talk about. So, spoiler alert, right off the bat, you kind of mentioned this at the end of the question. I'll never say never. In the last 5 years, have maybe pulled one key for skin. I will avoid it at basically all costs. It's just upside down. It's wagging the dog. What are we trying to make look good with our primaries if not skin? Skin should be like bullseye, dead on by the time we've moved on from primaries and we're working secondaries. If it's not, that happens all the time. I'm not saying I'm that good and I never look at skin and go, oh, that's not quite right yet, but I'm going to go back to my primaries. And that's my primary anchor when I'm grading with my primaries, is to optimize skin tone, at least when there's skin in the frame. Because that's people. That's what we're most sensitive to. That's where our memory colors are. That's what matters most in a color grade. So that's what I'm going to prioritize with those primaries. So I generally won't pull a key. So that if you want to talk about better strategies for pulling that key, if you insist on doing that, nothing much more to add there beyond what we've already talked about. Make it broad, make it soft, use as few parameters as possible, limit it to luminance if you can, and then add things. Start with luminance. If that doesn't do it, add hue. If you have to add a third, you can add saturation, but another good general rule of thumb, you really should never need more than 2 parameters to pull a good key that's going to travel well. So same sort of stock answer there if you insist on pulling a qualifier for skin. But the better question, what would you do as an alternative to create separation? That's a great thing to talk about. Some of that, we've talked about my Kodak 2383 look or my LUT rather, that I make available to you guys for free. We've talked about my Core Elements LUT pack, which is what I'm using here today as sort of like my stock look for these shots. So right now it's kind of all layered into just this one compound node. But one of the things happening here, let me actually double check this. I think I might be doing something fancy. Tell you what, I'm going to reset this and we're going to go to, here we go. We're going to go DaVinci Wide Gamut to 709. Well, why does that look utterly insane? Oh, am I just color man? Okay. Never mind. I'm just going to wipe out that look, and let's use my Core Elements LUTs just as an example. Creating separation between skin and surroundings is one of the core priorities for me when I'm doing look development, because it's super important, and it's something that you see like in any grade. Go look at any grade that you love, and go look at 10 grades that you love, and tell me which ones don't seem to have an emphasis on separation of skin from the rest of the frame. It's a pretty universal thing. Like, it's tough to make that look bad. If you can overcrank it, of course, but it's a pretty universally pleasing thing. So I'm glad we asked the question, and it's super valuable. But if we look at like I'm just going to use my elements LUTs. These are available on my website, cullenkellycolor.com. And what's fun about them is you can mix and match them. So there's a tone, which does your contrast, and then there's a palette, which does an overall kind of color palette. But if you look at the net of basically any of these, I think rain is maybe a particularly good example. And let's go to maybe this shot here. If you look at the net of this adjustment, and let's actually, since we're talking about separation, let's go for a selection that really, really kind of maxes that out. You know, something like this. Now, am I doing anything at the clip level? No. And let's make sure I'm input mapping properly, which I am. So, you know, if you, this is just my creative look. Do you see that separation coming into play there? That's just coming from a well-designed look that in this case is deploying as a LUT. And just because this is like literally my favorite pastime, I'm going to keep flipping through these. Even better example. You see that separation? It's one of the most difficult things to do cleanly, to do consistently, to do well within Resolve, within the Resolve tools. It's one of the first things that I look to a LUT for, and one of the first things that I look to implement when I'm developing a LUT, if that makes sense. Now, if that annoys the hell out of you that I'm saying use a LUT or use my LUT, let me give you the basic breakdown of what's happening here. A huge part of this, there's complex stuff happening under the hood here that I'm not going to be able to explain without taking you through a lap of a creative color science course. But one of the fundamental things that is happening here is a contrast curve, which we've talked about before, where we do a general S-curve shape, like so. I'm breaking my own rule and not anchoring myself to mid-gray when I do this, but you can just imagine for the sake of argument that I have followed my own advice and used my exposure chart to make sure I'm not moving middle gray with my look, my global creative curve. And then in the subsequent node, I'm going to ungang my channels. Let's create an imaginary mid-gray pivot point and say that I've arrived at it using the exposure chart, even though I'm not going to spend time on that right now. So there's my mid-gray. And then I'm going to do warm stuff up top, some combo of red and green. And after I do this, I'm going to do cool stuff down in the bottom, some combo of blue and green. There's a million ways you could do this, and I'm making very quick and probably not beautiful work of it right now. But if I do something like that and then take my intensity to like 65, maybe 75 on all channels. Just this right here, contrast curve plus split tone, that's a fantastic way to get skin tone separation. It's one of the main value props of this split toning technique that I'm talking about here, that I talk about all the time. And it's just too subtle, too gentle, too broad, too soft to ever do anything bad to the image, unlike a qualifier. So that's a great example to me of something that, like, I see so many young colorists with good taste identifying like, hey, this is something that I see in images that I find really compelling, whether that's, you know, an Alfred Hitchcock movie or my friend Jill Bogdanowicz doing the grade for Joker. We look at it and we go, wow, look at the skin tone separation. That's just beautiful. I want to do that. And that's a great thing. That means you have good taste if you're able to spot that. But it's one of those instances where like the solutions that are being sort of like passed around and held up as the ideal way to get at that, the ones that our software tells us are good, the ones that frankly like most of YouTube tells us are good, are not good. And I guarantee you are not the way that in the case of contemporary color grading like Jill or anyone else in that category, they're not pulling skin tone qualifiers to separate things. I guarantee you they're not. So this is one of many alternate strategies that you can use, but it's a question worth exploring, and a great starting off point is to say exactly the question that you did. How can I create really strong skin tone separation without resorting to a qualifier? I promise you that's a really fun question to ask and to explore. Wow, we've hit 11 o'clock on the nose, and I feel like we covered everything I was hoping to and a little bit more. Let's do one more if we've got one, Rafa.
We have a question from Jim Robinson. Seems like people are avoiding the color warper when it does almost everything discussed for refining skin and smooth transitions. Why is it not more popular for pros to use?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I'm glad Jim brought it up. He's exactly right. Everything that I've proposed as like the better usage, or the better way to manipulate your secondaries and to like rotate yellow or, you know, like desaturate red, whatever you're trying to do, you can absolutely do in the color warper. And I think Jim may have actually been one of the first to point this out to me some time ago, that one of the awesome things about the color warper is you can actually do more than one of those things just on the spider web here. You don't have to do, oh, a little hue versus hue, and then a little hue versus sat, and then a little sat, Luma versus sat, or whatever you're doing. You can hit a lot of that stuff within one interface here. I'll give you my honest answer. First of all, I don't talk about it as much because I'm just not in the habit of using it. It's not something that has really found its way into my workflow as being, for me, the HSL curves have been there longer, so it's something that has to be better in order for me to adopt it, and I don't find it to be compellingly so. But the bigger reason for me personally is kind of what I just showed you guys a moment ago. Let's say I've got that same note about like, oh, I want to swing my blues a little more teal cyan. Same thing, I'm just going to go to my curves, go to my hue versus hue, find my blue preset, and rotate clockwise just a little bit. It's just faster. I can't get at that with my control surface. Unless, is there a way to get at the color warper on the control surface? I don't think so. Do you know, Rafa?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question, please?
Do you know, is there a way to manipulate color warper points from the control surface?
I don't actually know because I hate the color warper.
There's my other reason, Jim. I'll get in trouble with Rafa if I use the color warper. But no, I would be floored to learn that you can manipulate that spider web. I don't even know what that would look like to have it mapped to the panel, but that's my main reason, is just speed. It's not, there's nothing in the color warper I can't do with my HSL curves, even if I have to use more than one. And I'm just really fast, and the interaction is really fast from the control surface when I do it that way. That's a great place to round things out for today, guys. I hope we made up for our down week and then some. So glad to be back with y'all and hanging out on a Friday morning. Favorite part of the week. I hope you guys have an awesome weekend, an awesome following week. We've got a new pre-recorded video, a new grade school coming up next week that I'm excited to hang out with y'all for. Go check out the Colorist Career Accelerator waitlist if you are at all interested in getting on there. Just to reemphasize, it's happening October 13th through 16th. It's for professional or aspiring professional colorists as opposed to hobbyists. And it sold out very, very fast last time. 91% of those participants were on that wait list. So if you've got any interest in being in there, you've got a far better chance of grabbing one of the limited seats if you're on the wait list. So I hope you go check it out, and I hope to see you in there in the fall. I'm super excited about it. It's only going to be bigger and better than the already amazing time that we had over the summer. So you guys have an awesome weekend. Always a pleasure hanging out with y'all, and we'll see you very soon.